Welcome back to another episode of Free Space News, and today I have a bit more of a lighthearted video for you, and this is just about, I was kind of scrolling through articles in the Washington Post the other day, and I found a really funny one. The headline is, Trump considers former GOP presidential candidate Herman Cain for Federal Reserve. Now, for those of you who don't follow U.S. politics, Herman Cain is a character, to say the least. I want to get into that later, but first of all I want to kind of go into about what the article means and what it's saying here. So it says, quote, President Trump is considering whether to appoint former GOP presidential candidate Herman Cain for a spot on the Federal Reserve's board. Two people familiar with the process said, a reflection of the less formalized vetting process at the White House for top posts. Cain ran for president in 2012 but lost during the Republican primary to Mitt Romney. Former pizza industry executive, yes, you heard that right, he became famous for his simplified tax plan known as 999 and for complaints that he sexually harassed women. So obviously that's not, that's probably an unfair way to sum it up. That's not his entire record, but I do want to get into a little bit of what made him famous on the campaign, some of his gaffes, just to have a little bit of a laugh over, and then kind of end with a serious discussion of whether he would make whether he's a good choice to be on the Federal Reserve Board. So I want to start by going into some of his gaffes, which are pretty freaking great, if I have to say so myself. So if we go back to 2012 or 2011, in the where he was campaigning in the primary for the Republican nomination, he was asked about Libya. At the time, there was an uprising in Libya as part of the Arab Spring. There was a big debate as to whether or not we should support Gaddafi, who was a dictator who had committed a large amount of atrocities, or if we should support the rebels in overthrowing Gaddafi. Kind of similar to what's going on right now in Syria. So Herman Cain was asked about the situation, and the response was, his answer was glorious.
So you agreed with President Obama on Libya or not?
Okay, Libya. President Obama supported the uprising, correct? President Obama called for the removal of Gaddafi. Just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing before I say, yes, I agreed, I know I didn't agree. I do not agree with the way he handled it for the following reason. No, that's a different one.
He looks like a kid in English class who didn't read the book and then he's called on to give a commentary about it.
Here's what I would have done a better job of determining who the opposition is. And I'm sure that our intelligence people had some of that information. Based upon who made up that opposition, okay, based upon who made up that opposition, might have caused me to make some different decisions about how we participated.
That's the most nothing answer I've ever seen. He's basically narrowing it down to, okay, I'll do either the same thing as what the Obama administration did, or something else. Now, one of the reasons I'm showing you this clip is because I honestly think that Herman Cain is not that bright. And that's not something I would say about most politicians. There's a few candidates running in 2012 that I think you could probably argue weren't that bright. Cain is one of them. Michelle Bachmann was another one. And then Rick Perry, who famously had his oops moment on the stage where he couldn't remember which federal department he wanted to get rid of. It was the Department of Energy. Fun fact, he's now the head of the Department of Energy. I think most politicians are generally smart people. Whether or not they have your best interests in heart is another question, but I think with Herman Cain it is more of a question about his intelligence. And specifically, we're just talking about governing intelligence, or intelligence on relevant current events issues. I mean, he was the CEO of a major company. He probably has some idea of how to run a small business, but not how to run one of the largest democracies on the planet. Now, to continue on this trend of hilarious gaffes, where he clearly doesn't really know what he's talking about, we can look back to when he was asked about what we should do with regard to China, and specifically whether or not he views China as a military threat to the United States. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
Do you view China as a potential military threat to the United States?
I do view China as a potential military threat to the United States.
And what could you do?
Okay, stop right there. A potential military threat to the United States. The United States outspends the next, I believe it's like the next 8 countries combined when it comes to defense. So if you're talking about a potential military threat, China's not even close to having the kind of capability you would need to actually invade the United States. Not really sure what exactly he means by a military threat either. The question is probably ill-posed as well, because what does that mean? What does that mean, a military threat?
When we get our economy growing back at the rate of 5 or 6% that it has the ability to do, we will outgrow China. And secondly, we already have superiority in terms of our military capability.
There you go.
And I plan to get away from making cutting our defense a priority and make investing in our military capability a priority.
Wait, you just contradicted yourself again. What?
So yes, they're a military threat. They've indicated that they're trying to develop nuclear capability. And
Whoa. They've indicated that they're trying to develop nuclear capability? China tested its first nuclear weapon in 1964. Look, I get it, that's a very specific fact, and that's not something that everyone necessarily needs to be aware of. But if you're running to be the President of the United States and you don't even know that China has had nuclear weapons for almost 50 years, and you're saying they have indicated that they're trying to develop nuclear capability, that shows that you're not really paying attention to the broader situation. So now I want to actually get into some serious, policy-related things around Herman Cain, specifically related to the Federal Reserve, which Trump is, considering him to be on the board of the Federal Reserve. If you don't know, Herman Cain used to be on the board of the, I believe it was the Kansas City Federal Reserve. So he does have some experience in that. The problem is that when it comes to, I would argue, one of the most important factors of the Fed, meaning whether or not we should audit the Fed, he is completely inconsistent on that, and I'll show you that in this next clip, in which he absolutely flip-flops on the issue.
Some people say that we ought to audit the Federal Reserve. Here's what I do know. The Federal Reserve already has so many internal audits, it's ridiculous. I don't know why people think we're going to learn this great amount of information by auditing the Federal Reserve. There's no hidden secrets going on in the Federal Reserve to my knowledge. And I tell people, we've got 12 Federal Reserve banks. You find out which district you're in, call them up and go from there. We don't need to waste money with another commission or an audit that's not necessary. You're listening to the Neil Bortz Show, and this is Herman Cain. I am thankful to Representative Ron Paul for his consistent and steady pressure on the Federal Reserve. And as chairman of the Subcommittee on Domestic Monetary Policy, he will have the oversight of the activities of the Federal Reserve, including the ability to require an audit of the Federal Reserve Bank. Congressional oversight, and not more commissions appointed by the president, will bring more accountability to the Federal Reserve on behalf of the American people.
Okay, so that is a clear flip-flop on the issue, and it's an important issue too, because the Federal Reserve is in charge of monetary policy for the United States, and that's not something that we don't want to have oversight. That's something that absolutely needs congressional hearings looking into the actions of the Federal Reserve, regardless of what political party is in charge, and regardless of whether or not the people in charge think that their actions are good or bad. So that's going to do it for this video. I've been covering a lot of some heavier and more passionate topics recently. I just wanted to do something kind of funny, kind of light, and hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know if you want me to do more of this type of stuff, more light kind of funny stuff that also relates to important issues. Make sure to like this video, comment down in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next video. Peace.